Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling the global economy.
Ooh,
Specifically, how it's changing,
it is changing a lot.
who the new power players are,
Some new faces on the scene.
and what it all means for, well, you.
That's the important part, right?
Definitely. And we've got some really interesting sources today
We do.
that talk about everything from something called the global south
Interesting term.
to how technology is like shaking things up in places you might not expect.
Definitely not the same old story anymore.
Exactly.
Okay.
So for decades, it was all about the G7.
Right. The G7.
You know, the U.S., Canada, Japan, those guys.
The big players.
Yeah, they were like the dominant force.
Shaping the global economy, setting the rules.
But now
Things are getting
interesting.
more than interesting. I'd say things are shifting.
Okay, shifting how?
Becoming more, multipolar.
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 Okay, break that down for me. What does that even mean?
Basically, economic power isn't just concentrated in a few hands anymore. Okay, so it's spreading out.
Exactly. We're seeing these new economic powerhouses emerging.
Like who?
Well, the BRICS nations are a prime example.
Brazil.
Russia, India, China, South Africa.
Okay, got it.
And they have, like, a lot going for them.
What do you mean?
Resources,
Yeah.
huge populations, and their workforces are becoming more and more skilled.
So they're kind of like rising stars.
Yeah, exactly. And as they grow, they're going to have a much bigger say in how the global economy works, how things run.
So this shift from the G7 to the BRICS, how does that actually impact, like, someone listening right now?
Well, think about it. Imagine a world where more countries have a voice
Okay.
in setting those global trade rules,
Makes sense.
where investments flow to a wider range of countries.
Not just the same old, same old.
Right. Where innovation isn't limited to Silicon Valley.
So it's like more opportunities everywhere.
Potentially, yeah. More balanced distribution of wealth, more opportunities in developing countries.
I like the sound of that.
And even, like, lower prices for consumers worldwide. Think about it. More competition, lower prices.
Interesting. So you mentioned India, and our sources highlighted them a lot.
Oh, yeah. India's fascinating.
They talked about their workforce.
Huge workforce.
Huge and skilled, like that's their secret weapon or something.
It kind of is.
Yeah.
India has the potential to be a real global economic powerhouse. And a lot of that comes down to their human capital.
Human capital meaning.
Their people, a massive young population, and increasingly they're tech savvy.
So that's a good combination.
It's a recipe for innovation and economic growth, but it's not just about the numbers.
There's more to it.
It's about investing in education, developing those high-skilled workers.
Yeah, that makes sense. You got to train people for the jobs of the future.
Exactly. It's a long-term strategy, but it allows nations to move up that value chain.
And compete globally.
Exactly.
So education is key. But what about technology?
Oh, technology's always a game changer.
And it's constantly evolving.
It is. But what's exciting is that access to technology is expanding
Globally.
rapidly, even in places you might not expect.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Where, for example?
Well, the source actually highlights this really cool example in India.
Okay, tell me more.
They're using something as simple as QR codes.
Wait, QR codes? Seriously?
I know, right? Sounds basic.
Yeah, super basic.
But it's actually brilliant.
How so?
Well, in rural areas where traditional banking is limited, they're using QR codes to allow small businesses to accept digital payments.
Oh, interesting.
Farmers can connect directly with buyers. Individuals can access microfinance loans,
So it's like opening up the economy.
democratizing economic opportunities in a way.
That's amazing. Just a simple QR code.
Who would have thought?
So we've talked about Asia, but our source was really optimistic about Africa too.
Yeah, Africa's got a ton of potential.
What makes them so optimistic?
Africa has vast natural resources, a young and rapidly growing population.
A lot of people.
A lot of young people, which is what they call a demographic dividend.
Okay.
And there's a real hunger for progress, for change.
But there's always a but, right?
There are a few things that need to happen for Africa to truly reach its potential.
Like what?
Well, first, there needs to be a stronger focus on unity within the continent.
You mean like between the different countries?
Yeah, breaking down those barriers to trade, collaborating more.
So more of a team effort.
Exactly. The source really stresses the importance of creating a more unified economic bloc.
I see. Strength in numbers.
And second, and this echoes what we talked about with India, investing in human capital.
Education again.
Yep, especially in STEM fields. Science, technology, engineering, math. Equipping Africa's youth with the skills they need for this rapidly evolving global economy.
Makes sense. Got to prepare for the future.
Absolutely.
Okay, so unity and a skilled workforce. Got it. But sometimes it feels like the global financial system itself is, like, working against developing countries.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
Does the source talk about that at all?
Definitely. They're pretty critical of existing global financial institutions.
Like the IMF, the World Bank.
Those are the ones.
They're supposed to be helping countries develop, right?
That's the idea,
And
but
what's the issue?
the critique is that these institutions, which are often seen as the gatekeepers of the global economy,
The ones who decide who gets what.
right, they haven't really adapted to this emerging multipolar world.
Interesting. So they're stuck in the past.
In a way, yeah. Their policies, their lending practices, even their voting structures, they tend to favor wealthier nations.
Which creates barriers for developing countries.
Exactly. And the source argues that these institutions are in dire need of reform.
Big changes.
Big changes to address these imbalances and make sure they're actually contributing to global development, not hindering it.
So it's like we need a whole new system.
That's what the source is calling for, a new financial architecture.
Okay, what would that look like?
It would encourage investment in low-income regions, support sustainable development,
Sounds good.
and it would reflect the voices and needs of all countries, not just a select few.
That's a pretty tall order, right? Reforming these huge
It
institutions.
won't be easy, that's for sure. It's a complex issue, but it's a conversation that needs to happen.
Because the stakes are high.
The stakes are very high.
Okay, so we've talked about the players, the challenges, some of the potential. But what about the role of governments in all of this?
Yes, government.
What's the source's take on that? What kind of policies do we need to make all this happen?
It all comes down to long-term strategic planning.
Okay, so not just thinking about today, but tomorrow too.
Exactly. It's not enough to react to the current moment. Governments need a vision for the future,
Like a roadmap.
a roadmap for economic development that goes beyond those short-term political cycles.
So you're saying think beyond the next election.
Think about the next generation, the next decade.
That's a challenge for politicians.
It is, but the source emphasizes that governments need to be making strategic investments in things like infrastructure, education, healthcare,
The foundations.
the foundations of long-term economic success.
And these investments can't be like random or reactive.
They need to be part of a coherent plan, a well-thought-out plan that considers future generations.
That makes a lot of sense. And honestly, that's good advice for any country.
Absolutely. It's not just about emerging economies, it's about taking a holistic view.
Understanding that those short-term gains can sometimes come at the expense of long-term prosperity.
Exactly. And honestly, that applies to businesses, individuals too.
It's about making choices today that create a better tomorrow.
Well said.
This is already so insightful, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
I've got a lot more to unpack.
There's so much more in these sources.
In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore what this multipolar world means for collaboration.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Can these countries put aside their differences and work together? That's the question we're tackling next.
I am hooked already. Stick with us, listeners. We'll be right back to explore those exciting possibilities. Welcome back, everyone. So we've been talking about this, like, major power shift.
Huge shift.
Yeah, in the global economy.
It's a new world.
With the rise of the global south and this whole idea of a multipolar world.
Multipolar, lots of centers of power.
Exactly. But now, you might be thinking,
Yeah, what am I thinking?
well, like, okay, more players on the field.
More cooks in the kitchen, so to speak.
Does that just mean, like, more competition?
More competition,
More
more...
conflict?
Yeah, more conflict.
Yeah, is it going to be a mess?
Well, it's a natural concern.
Right.
Anytime you have different nations, each with their own interests, their own agendas, all vying for influence.
It can get messy.
It can, but what's really interesting
Yeah.
in these sources is the emphasis on collaboration.
Collaboration.
Yeah, working together.
So you're saying it doesn't have to be like a cutthroat,
No,
yeah, like
sure.
everyone for themselves kind of situation.
Not necessarily. This multipolar world could actually lead to more countries working together.
Really? More teamwork.
More teamwork. Because think about it, a lot of the biggest challenges we face today,
Like what?
climate change, pandemics, extreme poverty,
They problems.
huge problems. Global problems that no single country can solve on their own.
We're all connected.
We are.
Uh-huh.
And these problems require, like, a coordinated international effort.
So a multipolar world where power's more distributed,
Or spread out.
yeah, could actually encourage that cooperation.
It could be the catalyst.
Interesting. Okay, I'm starting to see the potential here.
Right.
But how would that work in practice? What would that global collaboration look like?
Well, the source gives some pretty compelling examples of what's already
Oh,
happening.
yeah, like what?
There's been this surge in what they call South-South cooperation.
Yeah, south. Yeah.
Yeah, where developing countries are basically bypassing the traditional power structures
Cutting out the middleman,
and collaborating directly with each other,
country to country.
sharing knowledge, resources, expertise in areas like agriculture, healthcare, renewable energy.
Okay, so less reliance on, like, the big institutions.
Exactly.
Got it. Can you give me, like, a specific example of this collaboration in action?
Absolutely. One that really stood out to me was how India is helping other countries, particularly in Africa,
Oh, interesting.
develop their agricultural sectors,
Sharing their expertise.
sharing their expertise in things like drought-resistant crops,
Important.
water management techniques, agricultural technology.
So they're not just giving handouts, they're sharing knowledge.
Exactly. This type of knowledge transfer can have a huge impact on food security, economic development.
That's amazing. So if developing countries are, like, increasingly working together,
Teaming up.
yeah, where does that leave the traditional powerhouses, the G7?
G7.
Yeah, are they just going to fade into the background?
Well, not necessarily. The source actually suggests that the G7 still has a really vital role to play,
Okay.
but they need to kind of adapt
Adapt to the new reality.
to this new reality. It's not about dictating terms anymore or imposing solutions.
More like partners.
More like partners, collaborating on an equal footing.
Sharing the stage.
Exactly. And leveraging each country's strength.
Working together, using what everyone brings to the table.
That's the idea.
But let's be real, there are going to be some bumps in the road, right?
Oh, yeah.
Anytime you have this, like, major power shift,
Yeah,
there's bound to be some friction.
absolutely. Competition for resources, different political ideologies, those historical grievances,
Old baggage.
all that can create tension. And the source acknowledges those complexities,
Right.
but they also emphasize the importance of strong institutions
Okay.
and diplomatic channels to manage those tensions.
Keep things from boiling over.
Exactly.
So what kind of institutions are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about a global governance system
Okay.
that's truly representative of this multipolar world.
Everyone has a voice.
Exactly. Think
Yeah.
international organizations that have fair voting structures
So everyone's vote counts equally.
that give developing countries a real say in decision-making.
Not just the wealthy nations.
Right. And that can, effectively mediate disputes
Free referee.
and force agreements.
Keep things fair.
That's the idea.
So it's not just about creating new organizations, but also reforming existing ones.
Reforming the old to fit the new.
Yeah, to reflect this new balance of power.
Exactly. It's a big undertaking.
Huge.
Requires a shift in mindset, a willingness to share power,
It's about commitment, right?
a commitment to finding solutions that benefit everyone.
Not just a select few.
Everyone.
You've painted this, like, fascinating picture of this complex, interconnected world.
It's a complex world.
But I want to bring it back down to earth a little bit.
Back to reality.
Yeah. How will these changes actually affect the average person?
The average person.
Yeah, what does this mean for our jobs, our livelihoods, our everyday lives?
That's a great question. And actually, the source addresses that directly.
Oh, they do.
They argue that these shifts in global economic power are going to have a ripple effect
Ripple effect.
across every aspect of our lives.
So no one's immune.
No one's immune.
Yeah.
For starters, we're likely to see a more diverse and interconnected global economy.
Diverse how?
Well, think about it. Increased trade and investment between countries
More connections.
means more opportunities
Okay, opportunities for who?
for businesses, for entrepreneurs, for investors, but also more competition.
The downside.
This could lead to lower prices for consumers on everything,
Oh, it's good.
electronics, clothing, but it also means businesses will need to be more agile,
Agile. Okay.
innovative
They keep it.
to stay ahead of the curve.
So it's a double-edged sword.
It is. More opportunities, but also more pressure to adapt.
What about jobs? People are always worried about jobs moving overseas.
It's a valid concern, but it's not that simple.
More nuance.
The source argues that this shift will actually create new opportunities as well,
New opportunities.
particularly in fields that require specialized skills, knowledge.
So it's not just about jobs disappearing.
It's about the types of jobs that are in demand changing.
Makes sense. What kind of jobs do you think will be in demand?
Well, as emerging economies grow,
They get bigger.
they'll need skilled professionals.
In what areas?
Engineering, technology, healthcare, finance.
So those high-skill jobs.
And this could actually create opportunities for people in developed countries
Oh, interesting.
if they have the right skills
So it's about being prepared.
and being willing to embrace a globalized work environment.
The world is shrinking.
It is.
So being adaptable, keeping your skills sharp, that's more important than ever.
Absolutely.
Any other advice for navigating this changing world?
One thing that really stood out to me from the source was the importance of cultural understanding.
Cultural understanding, okay.
As the world becomes more interconnected, being able to communicate effectively
Breaking down those language barriers.
and work collaboratively with people from different cultures.
Yeah. Different backgrounds, different perspectives.
That's going to be a huge asset, both personally and professionally.
And so it's not just about economic shifts.
It's about being globally minded, culturally aware.
It's about being a good global citizen.
It is. Recognizing that we're all interconnected, that our actions have global consequences.
We're all part of this big system.
We are. And understanding those different perspectives is essential in this new world order.
I love that. This has been such a fascinating conversation.
It has.
We've covered so much ground, from the rise of the global south
Yeah.
to the potential for global collaboration
Lots of potential.
and the impact of all this on our daily lives.
The personal level.
And we're not done yet.
We're not done yet.
In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to distill all of this into some key takeaways
Key takeaways.
and explore some final thought-provoking questions to leave you pondering.
Something to think about.
Don't miss it. We'll be right back after a quick break. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about some really big, complex ideas
Yeah.
about the global economy, the rise of new power players, and, the potential for both conflict and collaboration.
Two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. So before we wrap things up,
Yeah.
I thought it would be good to distill all this information.
Distill it down.
Yeah, into some key takeaways.
The big picture.
So if our listeners walk away remembering just a few things from this deep dive, what should they be?
Well, the one that jumps out to me first is that that old world order,
The old way of doing things?
that old way of doing things where a handful of countries called all the shots.
The G7.
Yeah, that's fading.
It's on its way out.
It's on its way out. We're moving towards a multipolar world.
And that means?
It means the rules of the game are changing.
It's a whole new ball game.
Exactly.
So how do we navigate this new landscape?
Well, that brings us to the second takeaway.
Number 2.
Collaborate.
Teamwork.
Teamwork is key. We can't solve these global problems in isolation.
Like we were saying before, right?
Exactly.
Climate change, economic inequality, global health crises.
It takes a village.
It really does. And you know what's really interesting?
What's that?
We're already seeing this happening, that collaboration,
Mhm.
particularly in the global south.
They're leading the way.
They're forging these new partnerships, finding these innovative ways to support each other's development.
Sharing knowledge, sharing resources.
It's pretty inspiring, actually.
It is.
But you mentioned earlier that we also need to rethink our global institutions.
Ah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the third key takeaway is that we need a new system of global governance.
New system.
Because those institutions that were created, decades ago,
Back in the day.
the IMF, the World Bank,
Big names.
they're not really equipped to deal with the complexities of this multipolar world.
It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Kinda, yeah. We need institutions that are more inclusive,
More representative.
that give all countries a real voice,
Not just the wealthy ones.
and that are designed to actually promote global cooperation, sustainable development.
So it's a pretty big task,
It's
right?
a huge task. It's like restructuring how the world works.
Yeah, but it's also an opportunity
A massive opportunity
to build something better.
to create a system that's fairer, more just, more sustainable.
I like that. So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I always like to leave our listeners with something to ponder.
A food for thought.
A little thought-provoking question, something to spark further exploration.
Okay, what do you got?
Well, what if we embraced the idea that the global economy is no longer a zero-sum game?
Not zero sum.
That one country's success doesn't have to come at the expense of another's?
A win-win.
Exactly. What new possibilities for cooperation, for shared prosperity might emerge?
Ooh, that's a good one. It really challenges us to think differently.
To imagine a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive?
It's a big vision, but definitely one worth striving for.
I agree. And while there will definitely be challenges,
Mm,
I'm hopeful
me too.
that by understanding these shifts, embracing collaboration, and,
Yeah.
working towards a more equitable global system,
More just,
we can create a brighter future.
we can. It's up to us.
Well said. And on that note of hope and possibility,
Open possibility.
we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thank you all for joining us as we explored these shifting sands of global economic power.
A pleasure to be here.
And remember, stay curious, keep learning, and never stop questioning the world around you.
Never stop questioning.
Until next time.